Ever feel like, some seriously important stuff got left out of your education? Like, they taught us all about mitochondria and the Pythagorean theorem, but did anyone ever actually teach us how to manage our time or, like, how to have a difficult conversation without it turning into a total disaster?
It's funny, isn't it? We spend all this time learning stuff we may never actually use in real life, but then those everyday essential life skills, they kind of fall by the wayside.
Right. Like, nobody ever taught us how to do our taxes or how to, like, change a tire. But that's exactly why this podcast episode we're looking at today, The Foundation of Parenthood, really got us thinking. It's like they're saying, hey, education doesn't start in a classroom. It starts at home.
Exactly. They call it the parent-driven curriculum, or PDC for short. And it basically argues that parents are a child's first and most influential teachers. They're shaping their development, their values, their worldview, all before formal schooling even begins.
So it's almost like parents are running their own little unsanctioned schools, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that really blew my mind was this idea that being a parent should be treated like a profession, like something you actually need training and ongoing development for. I mean, it makes you wonder, why don't we have Parenting 101 as a required course?
I know, right? We need licenses to drive a car, to cut hair, to sell real estate, but when it comes to shaping a tiny human being's brain, we're just supposed to figure it out on our own.
And they weren't kidding about those early years being absolutely crucial. The podcast guest compared a young child's brain to a sponge, soaking up everything around them. Like, every interaction, every experience is literally wiring their brain.
It makes sense, though, when you think about neuroplasticity. A young child's brain is incredibly adaptable, is constantly forming new connections, and those early patterns, they can really have a lasting impact.
So all those things we do as parents, like teaching our kids to share, using polite language, creating consistent routines, it's not just about good manners or making our lives easier. It's about building the foundation for their future, right?
Absolutely. And it's not just the big, obvious things either. The podcast highlighted how even seemingly mundane things, like establishing a regular bedtime routine or modeling respectful communication, those things have a huge impact on a child's emotional regulation, their social skills, even their cognitive development. It's about creating a predictable and nurturing environment where their brains can thrive.
But, eventually, those carefully nurtured little sponges have to venture out into the wider world. And that world, well, it's not always so predictable and nurturing, is it? There are different opinions, different values, sometimes not so great behavior. So how do we prepare them for that?
Well, that's where the PDC shifts gears a bit. It starts emphasizing open communication and critical thinking as essential tools for navigating this more complex terrain.
Okay, I get that. But how do you explain something as nuanced as, like, respecting different opinions to a 4-year-old who's convinced their way is the only right way to build a block tower?
Well, the podcast gave a great example of this. They talked about a parent sitting down with their child and explaining that everyone has different ideas and perspectives, and that it's important to listen and try to understand, even if we don't always agree. And they emphasized that it doesn't have to be a big, serious lecture. It can be woven into everyday conversations.
So it's about embedding those critical thinking skills into those everyday interactions, right?
Yeah.
Instead of just saying, be nice, you're explaining the why behind it.
Exactly. And if we connect this back to the bigger picture, those early conversations about respecting different opinions, well, they can be really powerful, especially in a world where we're constantly bombarded with information, a lot of which is designed to be persuasive or even manipulative.
So it's like we're giving them, a mental toolkit to kind of sift through all that noise, all that information out there and figure out, okay, what's true, what's not true, what's someone trying to sell me or convince me of.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into what the podcast called the overlooked curriculum. Basically, it's all those crucial life skills that, well, traditional schools just don't seem to teach. The stuff you actually need to navigate the real world.
Okay, I'm all ears. What kind of stuff do they have on that list? You think surprising?
Well, some of it was pretty predictable,
Yeah.
Time management, problem solving, a little bit of financial literacy, those sorts of things. But they really emphasized digital literacy.
Well, yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? But these days, being able to navigate the online world safely and responsibly, it's like as important as knowing how to read.
Absolutely. And it goes way beyond just knowing how to use the technology,
Yeah.
It's about understanding how it impacts us, how to think critically about the information we're consuming online, how to avoid scams and misinformation. It's a whole other level of literacy.
So are they saying we need, like, a parent-driven curriculum 2.0 for the digital age? Because it feels like things are changing so fast, it's hard to even keep up, let alone teach kids how to handle it all.
And they actually touched on that. The podcast guest talked about how parents can play a huge role in helping their kids develop those digital literacy skills. Like just by modeling responsible tech use themselves, setting some healthy boundaries around screen time, and even just having conversations about online safety and critical thinking, not shying away from those conversations.
So it's more about being intentional and engaged rather than, becoming some kind of tech guru.
Exactly. And what I love about this whole approach is that it's not just about teaching skills, like checking things off a list. It's about cultivating a mindset, like a mindset of lifelong learning, adaptability, resilience. It's giving kids and ourselves the tools to not just survive, but thrive in a world that's constantly changing.
Okay, but let's be real. There are definitely days when even us adults are like, whoa, hold on, this is a little too much. It's like the world is spinning faster and faster, and it can be overwhelming even for those of us who've been around the block a few times.
And that's why I think the podcast's call to action is so important. They challenge listeners to really think about, what life skills do they wish they'd learned growing up, how those skills could have changed their path, and then, most importantly, how can we all work together, kind of a collective effort to make sure future generations are better equipped to face whatever challenges come their way?
It's like, we're all part of this giant experiment, figuring things out as we go. And sometimes the most helpful thing we can do is share our experiences, right? The good, the bad, so others can learn from them.
Exactly. And that actually reminds me of something the podcast guest said that really stuck with me. They talked about how sometimes the most valuable life lessons, well, they come from unexpected places. Like, they gave this example, I thought it was brilliant, about proper lifting techniques.
Wait a minute, lifting techniques?
Yeah.
Like how to pick up a heavy box without throwing your back out.
Exactly. And I know you're probably thinking, what does that have to do with, education or parenting? But the podcast guest made this really interesting point. They said that learning to lift properly, something so simple, it can have a ripple effect throughout a person's whole life.
Okay, now I'm intrigued. Explain it to me like I'm 5 and have no idea how to lift a heavy box.
Okay, so picture this. You're trying to lift a heavy box. Let's say it's full of books. If you just bend over at the waist and yank it up, all that strain goes straight to your lower back. Now, you might be fine in the moment, but over time, doing that over and over, well, that kind of stress, it can lead to chronic pain, injuries, even reduced mobility down the road.
Ouch. Yeah, my back is already starting to ache just thinking about it.
Right. But if you learn to do it the right way, squat down, engage your core muscles, lift with your legs, well, you're distributing the weight more evenly, protecting your spine. Small adjustment, but potentially huge long-term benefits.
So it's not just about avoiding a sore back. It's about understanding how your body works, respecting your limits, learning to move in a way that's both safe and efficient.
Exactly. And those principles, while they apply to so much more than just lifting boxes, it's about having this mindful approach to how we use our bodies in everyday life, whether we're sitting at a desk, playing sports, just going about our day.
I see what you mean. It's almost like that lifting technique. It's a metaphor for a whole approach to life, being intentional, thinking long-term, and learning to do things in a way that's, sustainable.
And that's exactly what the parent-driven curriculum is all about. It's not a set of rules or a checklist. It's a philosophy. It's about approaching life with intention and a commitment to, always learning, always growing.
That makes a lot of sense. But here's a question that popped into my head. This whole parent-driven curriculum thing, it makes sense when we're talking about kids. But what about those of us who aren't parents? Does it even apply?
That's a great question. And honestly, I think it's even more relevant for those of us who aren't raising kids right now. Because even if you're not a parent, you were once a child, right? Shaped by someone's version of this curriculum, whether it was your parents, grandparents, teachers, even just the culture around you.
Whoa. Yeah. So you're saying we're all products of some kind of parent-driven curriculum, whether we realize it or not.
Exactly. And understanding that can be really powerful. It can help us identify, strengths, weaknesses that were instilled in us early on, maybe even challenge some limiting beliefs we've been carrying around for years.
So even if you're not, planning on changing diapers anytime soon, this whole concept is worth exploring. It's like a secret key to understanding yourself better.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe it'll even inspire you to become a mentor yourself, passing on those valuable life skills to the next generation, whether it's through formal programs, informal relationships, just by setting a good example.
So we've talked about this parent-driven curriculum. Parents are the first teachers, laying the foundation. But then, the world comes rushing in, right? And these days, it feels like it's rushing in faster and faster. So how does this whole PDC idea, with its emphasis on life skills, hold up in a world that's changing so rapidly?
Yeah.
I mean, are we even teaching the right skills for what's coming next? It feels like predicting the future is, well, kind of impossible.
That's a really good point, and it's something the podcast guest brought up too. They talked about how we're in this era of information overload, like we're drowning in it. And that has massive implications for how we think about education, not just at home, but, in schools too.
Yeah, it's not enough to just memorize facts anymore, is it?
Yeah.
You have to know how to, sort through everything, evaluate what you're seeing, and figure out what's actually trustworthy.
Exactly. And that's where digital literacy becomes so crucial. It's gone from being a nice to have to a must have. Kids need to understand how these algorithms work, how to spot biases, how to protect themselves from scams and misinformation.
Right. It's almost like we need a whole new set of digital ethics, like how to be a responsible citizen in the online world.
And you know what? The podcast actually talked about that too. They emphasized how important it is for parents to model responsible tech use, setting healthy boundaries around screen time, and being open to having those conversations with their kids about the ethical challenges that come up online.
So it's less about, banning technology altogether and more about using it in a thoughtful way and showing kids how to do that too. But what about all those other life skills, the ones that might seem kind of, old-fashioned in our digital world? Is it still important to know how to change a tire when self-driving cars are right around the corner?
That's where things get really interesting. The focus needs to be on the underlying principles, right? So, yeah, maybe knowing how to change a tire specifically isn't as crucial anymore. But what is important is that problem-solving ability, that resourcefulness, some basic mechanical know-how.
So it's about giving them a framework that they can apply to lots of different situations, even ones we can't even imagine yet.
Exactly. And that takes a real shift in how we think about education. It's not about this fixed set of knowledge. It's about, being adaptable, being willing to learn and grow throughout your whole life.
It's like we're all students now. Parents, non-parents, doesn't matter. We're all just trying to keep up with this crazy, constantly changing world.
And that's actually pretty exciting because it means we can always learn new things, develop new skills, find creative solutions no matter what comes our way.
So we've gone from, parent-driven curriculum 1.0, where parents are the main teachers, to PDC 2.0, where digital literacy is essential. And now it feels like we're moving into this whole new era of lifelong learning, where being adaptable and having a growth mindset are the most important things. So after this whole deep dive, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that education isn't just one person's job. It's a shared responsibility. It starts at home, yeah, but it extends out into the world. And ultimately, it's up to each of us to keep learning and growing.
And maybe, by being a little more deliberate about the life skills we learn and the ones we share with others, well, maybe we can make the world a little bit easier to navigate for ourselves and for everyone coming after us.
I love that. So as you go about your day-to-day, think about this. What's one life skill you wish you had learned earlier in life? And how can you share that knowledge with someone else? Maybe it's your kid, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's even a complete stranger. It doesn't matter. Just share it.
That's a great question to ponder. And until next time, keep on exploring, keep on learning, and remember, the best education is the one that never ends.
This is DigitView.